Today on Voice of the Valleys, we're going to be going over the UK's descent into more of the digital slavery prison state as Keir Starmer announces mandatory digital ID for all citizens in order to tackle the small boats and clamp down on illegal working. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, a resident of the UK was accosted late at night by police for a meme he posted on X a few months ago. So you can imagine he was then taken off in the shack wagons and held for several hours without access to a solicitor. Going to go over all of that. We're also going to go over what many Plaid Cymru and many Senedd members think of people that disagree with their agendas. Namely, they think of you as nothing more than an animal, and I found that out personally. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys, yet again, with your host, friendly neighbourhood far-right thug. Again, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. Always theoretical unless he's not. Mr. George Creswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all doing well. Well, half joke. Half joke. Anyway, half joke, so certainly friendly in the neighbourhood. Anyway, so getting straight to today. A lot of things have happened. First off, I just wanted to say thank you all for bearing with me this last week or so. I had a few projects going on, different style of video that I'm working on, and different style of videos going forward that I'm working on as well to sort of broaden the content creation the landscape rather. So I was working on a video that is, in fact, because I can actually go get it, Recently, and it's members only on YouTube at the moment, although little snippets of it will be coming out over time. It's also available on Locals and Patreon. We recently broke down this book here, The Last Girl by Nadia Murad, my story of captivity and my fight against the Islamic State. Nadia Murad is a Yazidi woman who, when her village fell to ISIS in 2014, lost 6 of her brothers in the ensuing mass slaughter and the genocide as they were lumped into the mass graves behind the local school in her village of Kocho in Iraq. And then she was taken as a Sabiya, which is a Islamic sex slave, basically. She has a long story of daily torment, daily rapes, horrendous treatment. It really is a hard read at parts. But obviously she manages to escape, and then she was able to tell her story at the UN, and now she's founded her own foundation. And obviously the Yazidi genocide was something that happened, it started over 10 years ago now. So many good stories that you can learn, so many good lessons, rather, that you can learn from that book in particular. And the big thing is that why I wanted to go over it. So if you live in the UK, and you're seeing the political landscape, you're seeing that your politicians care more about policing what people say on social media instead of dealing with ethno-religiously motivated rape gangs. You're now seeing that many citizen journalists are reporting that there are, in fact, very likely ISIS operatives in the UK, and we've seen that there's good evidence to indicate that our open borders policy has just let in a bunch of terrorists through the border, right? And they're likely within these hotels. A lot of these quote-unquote asylum seekers, we're being told, are in these hotels. They're, in fact, not asylum seekers. They're a foreign army that have come in. They're now at a number where they outnumber our military, I believe, about between 2 and 4 to 1, I believe it is by some estimates. The government bends over backwards to make sure they're healthy, to make sure they're taken care of with private health care, with fast-tracked NHS appointments, free dental care, all of this stuff, right, to make sure they're fit, tip-top and healthy, because they're going to be our new enforcement arm to make sure we go along with the party orthodoxy, right, as they're bringing in this really drastic totalitarian system like something out of China, except it won't be the Chinese. That the government is not thinking about that, it's going to be British people that police their own, even though we have enough of those doing them anyway. They're going to bring in a bunch of foreigners who are going to be even more vindictive and evil because they've been told that they have racial grievances against us and all of these things. And a lot of them are motivated by ethno-religious supremacy and all the rest of it. You cannot use the same excuses, however, for the Yazidis that you would have if you're talking about the rape gangs, for example, whereas you might call, if you're that way inclined, as many politicians have, white trash, poor white trash, white slags, child prostitutes, all of this stuff, right? You can't use any of that stuff here, but the ideology, the thought processes, the worldview is all the same. The worldview is all the same. You just replace the population with a different population. And as a result, you can't use the same defences that people have been trying to use in the UK of Islamophobia and racism and all of this stuff, right? White supremacy and anti-racism. Can't do it. So many important lessons to learn. We went not only through the story, right? And I tried to make it a bit more cinematic, right? It's a lot more like a, not a documentary, but like I wanted to make it more movie-like. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean. It's a lot of extra effort that went into that video versus one of the like the podcast, for example, which is relatively easy to get out in comparison. A lot more editing, and I'm not the best at editing anyway. I'm trying to keep on top of uploads and making shorts and all of this stuff, right? So for all the time and stuff that went in, and not to mention with the system we're going to be talking about in the moment in the UK, which is the digital ID system, which is going to make employment even more difficult and getting employment whilst resisting digital ID is going to be potentially nigh on impossible. I'm basically reliant on you guys now, you guys who watch the show, you guys who get value out of these videos, which is why thanks to you guys coming in and watching the video, which really sparked a huge amount of channel growth initially. With the talking about the Canary Wharf Hotel incident, then you guys who again contributed to the views and subscriptions and etc. And a few of you have stuck around since then, a few of you I keep seeing popping up in the comments and all stuff like that, which I greatly appreciate. Thank you all so much. Have allowed me to get monetized, have allowed me to set up memberships, have allowed me to set up supers and all of this stuff. I'm going to be taking that going forward. As soon as I figure out sort of how to do it and make it look professional, like I see a couple of other people doing, like Andrew Wilson and Jake from Rattlesnake TV, they got a good streaming setup going. In the future, if it does scale, like we can bring on some staff and I can split the workload a little bit better. Maybe I can get an editor to handle the editing, because that's the one thing that takes so much time. And somebody that can do it better than I can. We can bring a higher quality production then, and that would be really, I don't really have much option at this point with the way things are going in the UK. So that's why I'm basically reliant on you guys now. If you guys are even able to take out the lowest membership on YouTube, or have a look. Sorry, my dog's having fun with a little squeaky chicken in the background. Or if you can, even just one time buying the video on Patreon. The video itself, if you want to watch it, but you don't want to sign up to a subscription membership or anything like that, there's a one-time fee for it on Patreon, which is a little bit cheaper, right? So you don't, not getting the additional benefits of the subscription on Patreon. So if you buy the video, it'll actually be a little bit cheaper and you can get access to that. I do believe there's a lot of good information in there. And this story is a very, very important one, especially if you want to understand a lot of the mindset of what's going on in the UK right now. So thank you all for those who keep tuning in and watching the show, even if it's just likes, comments, all of this stuff. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate it. Got some good interviews coming up for you as well. So if you're into the second membership tier, you'll have options to, submit questions and all of these things, right? So yeah, really looking forward to bringing a lot of stuff to you guys. I'm having to redo my second interview with Justine Winter at the moment because something happened with the camera during the interview. Something happened with the memory card and it got corrupted. So I'm having to go back and redo that, but we'll be bringing that to you very, very soon. Hopefully we'll be able to sit down and redo that next week. But I got a good other few interviews coming up in the future as well. So thank you all so much. I know some of you have submitted, people you'd like to see on the podcast as well in the comments. If there's anybody you feel would be a good person to talk to about a lot of these things, chuck their name down in the comments. I'll have a look at it. I'll have a look at who they are, see if I can reach out to them. So I can't make any promises, but you guys can suggest those things as well. Thank you all so much. Is the crux of this message. Thank you all so much for even just tuning in. If you are able to support me in any way, whether it's on YouTube membership, whether it's just a one-time donation, on the Buy Me a Coffee service, I was going to use that for a couple more things, but it's not really suitable for it. So if you just want to support me in any way that you can, just with a one-time donation, you can go through there. Also, if you want to go on to Locals, or if you want to go on to Patreon, then they'll also be on there as well. And they'll all be linked down below. Thank you all so much. Getting straight into it now. Digital ID. So, happened recently. Sky News is ones that broke the news on this, as we'll go through in a moment, and then we've got footage from Keir Starmer as well. This is what Sky News announced 2 days ago. It's coming to you from their X page, but it's digital ID to be made law mandatory for all adults in the UK to tackle the small boats. Coming on screen now.
Breaking news now. Digital ID will be made law for all adults in an effort to tackle small boats. Downing Street believes that a mandatory ID card system will help stop illegal immigrants working. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Mari Aurora. Mari, what more do we know about this?
Yeah, well, Gareth, this is interesting because this is something that has been spoken about a lot. Tony Blair, for instance, has been talking about this for years and years as what he always believed was one of the best ways to try and reduce illegal immigration and the ability for people to work illegally here in the UK. But Sky News understands that we will have an announcement, could be as soon as tomorrow, from the Prime Minister on these mandatory ID cards, an ID card system, the Brit card. And essentially what this will mean, it will be mandatory for all adults here in the UK. It will make it easier for employers and for landlords to make sure that those they are employing or renting or to actually have the right legal immigration status here in the UK. They can do it.
I think it'll also be very suspiciously easy for employers to work out what your political views are based on your social credit score and all the rest of it. Tony Blair, the brainchild behind diversity and the one that said we needed to rub the right's nose in diversity, all of this stuff, right? Of course, this is his brainchild. He tried to bring this in during the first sort of Labour administration. I'm not sure if it was the end of his administration or if it was during Brown's administration, but it was in 2006, 2007, sometime around that time. They tried to bring in stricter ID laws and all the rest of it. So this is furthering the descent into modern-day communist totalitarian systems, right? You're easily seeing now how they're paving the way for a system like China, right? That's what they're paving the way for. They're telling you it's to tackle the small boats. They're telling you it's because it's going to be so easy to tell people's immigration status, right? You know, they're probably just going to sweep everybody that's coming here illegally. They'll just sweep them in and say, yep, it's all fine. You've got your Brit card now. You're here legally. We can just doctor it to say whatever we want. And we know that the government is not above doctoring figures and making things fit their narrative now, are they? Oh, I thought my dog had grabbed my slipper then, but no, she's just grabbed her... As you can hear, she just grabbed her little squeaky giraffe. So my dog's having a whale of a time at the moment. Me too. Say hi. Anyway. So you see now, this is going to be linked to your employment status. It's going to be linked to your NHS stuff. It's going to be linked to just your transportation. It's going to be linked. There's going to be gates everywhere with facial ID and scanning your Brit card or whatever in order to even say that you can go anywhere and the government can turn it off at the flick of a switch. Truly Orwellian times that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. And even our friends, the Yanks across the pond, Ron DeSantis, observed that on X, commenting on it, saying very 1984 totalitarian-esque. But just so you can hear it from the man himself, right, our dear leader, Mr. Keir Starmer, our dear leader, Tutia Queer, here is him speaking on GB News at the 2025 Global something action, global program action, I believe it is, or global progress action. Everything global. Nothing for the people of Britain, right? Nothing for Britain in terms of and its national sovereignty, right? Everything has to be global, and that's obviously cuts to the root of the problem.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict. And that is why...
So, ladies and gentlemen, you might have just seen a big jump cut there because I talked for about 10 minutes and not realising that my microphone was on mute. So, I'm going to have to paraphrase what I said, unfortunately. So, what you heard there, ladies and gentlemen, is designed to tackle the issues of today. It's designed to tackle the small boats. It's designed to tackle poverty, all of these things. And we all know it's a great, big, giant fucking lie, right? These people in government, Keir Starmer, get his marching orders from the World Economic Forum, and he's basically Blair's puppet, and Blair always gets the marching orders from whoever's leading the World Economic Forum at this time, Klaus Schwab, and they're all in bed together with the UN and the EU then, and all the rest of them, right? They have no incentive to help us. They have no incentive to do it. They could do it if they wanted to, because they could change government policy, right? They could change government policy to what people of this nation actually want for the most part, right? They want the quote-unquote asylum seekers gone. They want the foreign army gone, right? They want our streets to be safe. They don't want their kids being snatched off the street by foreigners, right? They could change this overnight if they wanted to. But no, everything that they have to bring in has to look like it's going to help. But it's a bit like, again, somebody gives you something with one hand and they take with another, right? A Faustian bargain, if you will. But the thing is, you're not really getting anything out of it. You're just getting more surveillance, you're getting less freedom and less safety, ironically. Less safety. They're doing everything they can to make you more and more unsafe anyway, because they'll just have you go along with it. They'll use democracy to get rid of democracy by bringing in this foreign voting bloc to the tunes of millions. And if you don't believe me, we'll go over something which the Plaid Cymru MSs are saying in Parliament, right? And a lot of the other MSs are saying in Parliament, where they would happily bring millions, tens of millions to this country, right? Because it's a massive foreign voting bloc under the guise of empathy and care. And because I dared to criticise the globalist nation of sanctuary baby, right? Because I dared to criticise that, I got called a dog. I got called a dog by a Plaid Cymru AS. Your elected representatives, ladies and gentlemen, he's not from my constituency. He's not from my constituency, admittedly. But calling the Welsh people that they are meant to represent because they don't agree with their policies, and they'll call them out and mock them for it, they'll call them dogs. They'll liken you to dogs. They don't even see you as human. So that tells you a lot about the mindset of these people, right? I'll go over that at the end of the show. You can either skip to the chapters and go over that a little bit later, or you can wait and stay tuned for the end of the show. So, if the government wanted to solve it, they could. But no, they want more control. They want more surveillance, right? To a terrifying extent. They want to make us more like China. Klaus Schwab says China is the blueprint, right? And they're the ones giving us our marching orders, essentially. So, they mentioned Blair, right? Blair, who said we've got to rub the right nose in diversity, right? We got to go to war and destroy the forces of conservatism, which we talked about before, right? It was waging war on the very fabric of British society, right? The very values and principles and people that joined this nation together. That's what he went to war with, the greatest divider that we've ever had, in many ways. Now, the problem was building successively before that point, right? You know? The Windrush generation that I think it was Harold Wilson was Harold Wilson, I believe it was was Prime Minister at the time, and said, was on the verge of turning the boat around and sending it back to wherever it was coming from, or sending it over to, I think it was Jamaica he was going to send the boat back to, because people were so unhappy about it. People have been happy about the extent of Pakistani immigration. People have been very unhappy about the extent of African immigration, right? Because of the problems that it's led to. Right? You look at a lot of the countries in Africa and all across the Middle East, we don't want our countries looking like that. We were perfectly happy with the way our countries were, with the way our countries were. But the right nose had to be rubbed in diversity, right, and multiculturalism. And this is where we now are today. Now, the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, is that, again, they're realising people are cottoning onto it, so they're now having to try and cut off everybody's avenues of escape, or avenues of combating them, right? And that's what this digital surveillance prison state, what they want to build, is, right? Not to mention the Fabians that are running the country absolutely love Islam and love Mohammed. George Bernard Shaw was writing in a newspaper back in the early to mid. I think it was in the early 20th century. I can't remember the newspaper it was. I think I covered it 1 or 2 episodes ago, and saying that the Muhammad was a great character and something we should all seek to emulate. So it tells you a lot about this weird kind of hard left wing Islamic alliance, right? But here's so that was a paraphrasing of what I said, because again, I was on a roll during that about 5 to 6 minute monologue, and I realize now that I didn't even have my mic off mute. But here is Tony Blair at the World Economic Forum stating explicitly what this is going to be used for. So it's going to track illegal immigration, illegal working, all of this stuff. No. It's going to be used to monitor things like your carbon output. It's going to be used to monitor things like your vaccination status, right? Which, to my great shame, I got caught up in that over the last couple of years, right? Only recently, sort of around 2023, that I recently started seeing the con for what it was, right? Didn't see it because at the time it broke, I was in uni, and I wasn't a woke liberal communist, right? I wasn't a woke liberal communist, but I was asleep. if you will. I was asleep and I didn't understand the game that was going on, didn't understand the power and wealth play that was going on. Now I do. Now I do. Or at least I understand it a lot more. I'm not claiming to know everything, but I understand it a lot more. But this is Tony Blair outright saying, you need the data. You need to know who's vaccinated and who's not. You need to know who's exceeding their carbon allowance and who's not. You need to know, again, I'm adding ones into this now, but I'll give you another example of the individual carbon tracker coming up later. You need to know who said what, because they might have the wrong political opinions. They might not be adhering hard enough to the orthodoxy. They literally say it, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe we should try believing them once in a while.
The technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. Because in the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that. The technology.
Not making the same mistake again. We managed before, didn't we? This is the biggest thing. We managed before. Yes, we live in a more digital age. Yes, we live in a greater age of technological advancement. That's why we have to be so careful on how we use it. Right? Yes, we're very lucky to have that and live in this age of technological advancement where the life expectancy is the longest that it's ever been, right? And that many things that would have rendered us, not extinct, but many things that would have been much more threatening, you go back a couple of 100 years, through herd immunity, but also through advancements in medical technology, where we, moved on from bloodletting to actual medicines and such. It is truly something to be grateful for. But now we're seeing exactly how that's been weaponized. Ladies and gentlemen, it's being weaponized against you because you no longer have the choice. You no longer have the autonomy, if you will. For all of the talk of the left, for example, about autonomy, quote-unquote autonomy, over women's bodies and so on, right? So the fact they use it as an impedance to kill children and rob them of their natural body, right? They're awfully big on taking away your autonomy when it comes to personal decisions like vaccines and stuff like that. And that's what this is formulating the groundwork for. If you're not vaccinated, you won't be allowed places. You might not be allowed out of your 15-minute city. You might not even be allowed to use public toilet or whatever. If somebody associates with you and the camera system, right, the facial ID system and the gate tracking system like they have in China, associates you with being unvaccinated like a leper, and somebody associates with you, then their social credit score will go down as well. So you find yourself being more and more isolated and more depressed, and you take your own life and so on. You can see where this then ends up going. You can see how bad it is for people out in China when they get made homeless at the flick of a government switch. Should never be allowed to happen. Should never ever be allowed to happen. But that's what we're sleepwalking into, as the state controls more and more of our homes. As you have compulsory purchase orders in Ireland, where you have to sell your residence to the government, or you have to take in migrants to your home and whatever, into your spare room under force, right? Something that should never ever be allowed. But because we now have no mechanism of force, because we now have no ability to band together in any form of militia or anything like that, with our own right to bear arms or anything like that, because the state has the monopoly on force, it's very easy for them to do this kind of stuff. That's why the Americans take that Second Amendment so seriously, ladies and gentlemen. Why they take that Second Amendment so seriously? It's because the Second Amendment is pretty much what allowed them to get clear from us in the 1700s, right? In 1776. It was the Second Amendment that won them that. They didn't have, obviously the Second Amendment literally came later. It was the idea of the Second Amendment, right, of private gun ownership, that allowed them to form militias, that allowed them then to form into the Revolutionary Army, that then allowed them to win the War of Independence and separate from Britain, right? If they'd given over all of their fucking guns, they wouldn't have been able to do that, right? So that's why they care about that Second Amendment so much. That's why we should have cared about that private gun ownership so much and not allowed ourselves to be taken in by the propaganda, right? You see it what happens with school shootings all the time. You see it with the Charlie Kirk assassination. Charlie Kirk, one of the biggest gun ownership, advocates that there was, because he understood this, because he was killed by an assassin, right? Again, people tried to blame the guns, not the deranged lunatic who fucking shot him, right? I don't fall for the propaganda. Any government that wants to take away your guns is not doing it for a good reason. We're learning that now. The problems even go back before we really gave up big rights to private gun ownership after the Dunblane shooting in Scotland and stuff like that. But now you're seeing exactly when you have no enforcement arm. That's why Andrew Wilson says, for example, rights are force. You only have the rights that you are able to enforce, ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't have something that extends from yourself as a way to enact some kind of serious lethal force, it is a serious deterrent to any kind of criminal activity or government criminal activity and stuff like that, then you are very liable to be taken advantage of in this way by the government, because they then have the monopoly on force. So every single dictator takes away guns from the populace because they know how valuable they are. They know how valuable they are. It's the reason why in Cuba, in Cambodia, in all of these other places, right? They'll disarm the populace the minute they take power, because then they can't revolt against them. And that's what you're seeing now. I did mention, though, ladies and gentlemen, as they mentioned at the World Economic Forum, I'm not sure who this guy is. See if I can quickly find his name. It's a guy that's speaking at the World Economic Forum. And when they say, ladies and gentlemen, they're developing an individual carbon tracker, they absolutely mean it. And I can promise you that. They absolutely mean it. The time has now come, ladies and gentlemen, that we simply need to see what these people are doing. A lot of the time, simply believe them, because they mean what they say. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, just believe them.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
And then when we refer back to that video we talked about a couple of episodes ago, ladies and gentlemen, where Renee Hodenkamp, I believe her name is, apologies if I'm getting that wrong, said that, hang on, when you exceed your individual carbon allowance, you won't be allowed to buy meat at the tills. When you exceed this, you won't even be allowed to go through the tills, right, if your social credit score is not high enough. Can you now see how the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists and deranged lunatics, right, actually may have a point? Because the people that are in charge of bringing these systems in, the people who have control of our politicians that bring in these legislative changes, are outright saying this. Maybe, just maybe, we should believe them. We should believe them, because we have enough evidence to say, based on how our communities have changed, ladies and gentlemen, to see, oh shit, maybe they actually have a point, right? Maybe they actually have a point. And what you're going to see now, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing short of terrifying, because the music artist Massive Attack displayed how terrifying this can be, put on full display what it would be like to live in China and see it from the government's perspective, right? China, if you don't know, because again, I still have conversations with people and somehow they don't know this, has a camera system which they've invested millions into, as far as I know, hundreds of millions into, that is so sophisticated. They can measure who you are and see who you are without even seeing your face by measuring how you walk. You could be walking away from the camera and it could still tell that it's you by the way that you walk. That's how sophisticated these things are. And then it's linked to the social credit system, which is linked to the central bank, which then as soon as you do the slightest infraction, you get money taken out of your bank account, you get convicted right there and then, so your social credit score goes down, and then you lose all manner of privileges and rights and all of these things. And that's why, again, those people ended up getting homeless at the flick of a government switch. There's a post I'm going to bring up, which when I first recorded this episode, wasn't up on X at the time, but somebody summed this up extremely well, so I want to show you and read that post to you a little bit later. This is a small insight into what that would be like if it was deployed in the UK. See this and understand this is like something straight out of the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see it's coming up on screen now. It's got all these binary codes and stuff. Boom. Look at this. You're seeing all these people's faces. These are people in the crowd, ladies and gentlemen. Live tracking their faces in real time. This looks like something straight out of the Matrix or out of some weird sci-fi film, right? Out of some dystopia. This looks like something you see in the 1984 film, right? Now, just imagine, this is at a concert. This is at a music event, right? Seems that it would be relatively harmless. It's like a cool little stunt, right? Now imagine, as I said, this is linked to your bank account and it's linked to a score that you're credited on based on how quote-unquote good of a citizen you are, i.e. how good you adhere to government orthodoxy. Rare insight behind the scenes, this, and I don't even think they realise what they did. It is a cool technology, don't get me wrong, but it's absolutely terrifying. We're seeing how our government will misuse it. All our governments will misuse it. Or rather, use it for the purposes that they want to. And as a result, they're using it for the design that they want. However, one thing that's interesting, as well as people's like Yvette Cooper's perspective on it, right, is how people's tunes have changed. It's how people's tunes have changed towards this now that they're the one wielding the power and wielding the influence over this digital ID, right? And this is the last thing we're going to talk about on this topic today before we move on, given enough of the monologue to it. Should hopefully have given you enough of an idea as to why we should be opposing this as much as possible, and why, as I said before, I'm so tremendously grateful if anybody is able to support me in this way so that I can continue to do this for you. I honestly don't know what else I can do at this point, ladies and gentlemen, because with being as outspoken as I am, with being labelled as a fascist and the Antichrist and all of these things, it's only be a matter of time before what happens with my previous employer happens again if I decide to go somewhere else. Believe me, I'm thinking about it, but I've been terrified of that prospect because, you know, ultimately it would just be me being strong-armed into submission, and I don't want that. I don't want that. So that's why I'd be very grateful if anybody is able to help me out. Not to mention, as I said, it'll be able to scale it and grow it and hopefully get to more people then as well. MPs may have been misled over BAME voter ID claims. Keir Starmer posted something very interesting in, I believe it was January of 2020. So, just before I go over this, this is the post I wanted to bring up. So, somebody by the name of Damien, sorry. I thought I said Dan when I duplicated the tab. No, Damien, sorry. Damien / on X gave a great account of what it will be like to have this digital ID system brought in, right? So, he puts a picture of Tony Blair up on X, and I'll bring the picture up on here now. In fact, I'll bring the post up. I'll bring the post up on full screen for you so you can read it with me and see the picture that he brought up, because it's quite funny. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the post. It says here, we noticed you viewed misinformation on prohibited website x.com. In accordance with His Majesty's government digital ID policy guidelines, the following restrictions have been applied to your Brit credit account pending further review. And then he goes on to say, I just realised the border might have cut some of this off. I'll tell you what, I'll come back to full screen. Never mind. Bug protein credit allowance, negative 25%. Carbon credit allowance, negative 25%. Financial transaction allowance, negative 35%. Data allowance, minus 100%. Travel allowance, minus 65%. NHS waiting list position, minus 90%. A fine of £65 was already charged to your bank account. A further £65 will be charged should the offence occur again within 14 days. To appeal this action, please call the Brit Credit Reconciliation and Appeals Helpline on this number. Please note, due to high volume of calls, waiting times currently exceed 48 hours. That's exactly what it would be like. That's exactly what it would be like. And it even has the British sarcasm in the post, right? So a big cheers to Dan, a big cheers to Damien, sorry. Damien / I keep getting Damien and Dan confused for some reason. You can tell it's getting late on this Saturday night. And drowning my sorrows is not going down so well. But anyway, that's exactly what it would be like. So credit to people for taking the piss out of it in these ways and understanding exactly what it would be used for. People in the comments reading it in the voice of Overwatch from Half-Life 2. So again, it is like something out of a video game, like a dystopian post-apocalyptic video game, right? It's truly, truly awful, but it's interesting how people's tunes have changed. A lot of the left are going on at the moment because people on the right's tunes have changed with regards to digital ID. Adam Brooks, I believe it is taking a lot of flack at the moment for taking down one of his posts that he made, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago, campaigning on behalf of digital ID, saying, yes, it's a good thing, it should be implemented, right? Realizing now likely the error of his ways. But what is interesting as well is that it seems the left have flipped on these issues as well. And you can imagine if it was a true right-wing government in power, they would be truly against this for the same reasons that their political opponents are against it now. But interestingly, was that the left, particularly Keir Starmer, was against voter ID in 2020. Now, isn't that interesting? A law, a regulation, which would further help strengthen the integrity of our democratic elections by ensuring that everybody here is at the very least a citizen and has the right to vote. You can argue again, not taking into account the immigration debate and who should have been allowed here to vote, and that, you know, in the past people shouldn't have been allowed here. But at the very least, at this point in time, you can say that if somebody's come here legally, then under the present system that we have, they would be given the right to vote. And that they would be able to very easily get an ID that would prove that, driver's license, passport, whatever. Keir Starmer, in an article posted by The Guardian, MPs may have been misled over BAME voter ID claims, said in July 2020, right, before he was at the reins of power, the government's plans on voter ID risk locking people out of democracy. So he's all about digital ID and digital surveillance now that he's in power. But then when, and again, a lot of the people who are coming here from elsewhere in the world predominantly vote the left, they vote for more welfare state. When it was in his interest not to have IDs around voters and around voter law, he was all happily against it. But now that he's in the reins of power and those same laws would work against him, now he's all for ID and for digital ID and for surveillance and all of these things and for crackdowns, as any good authoritarian would be. So, in The Guardian, it says here, ladies and gentlemen, Electoral Commission data says data that proves voter ID doesn't discriminate against BAME doesn't exist. So it was in reference to this article, which I believe was saying that the data doesn't exist that proves that voter ID laws discriminate against, black, Arab, minority, ethnic, I believe is what the term is. I've never really known the acronym. I know those black and minority ethnic, right? That doesn't exist, because a big argument for the left at the time was that these, and the same was true out in America, was they were saying that, oh, hang on, black people can't get an ID, so they ain't going to be able to vote, so that's why we shouldn't have voter ID laws. Well, some of the most horrifically racist stuff, supposedly coming from the anti-racist side, right? And then when it was in Keir Starmer's benefit to do so, he was saying that, no, these laws are going to lock people out of democracy, right? They're going to lock people out of voting for me, so we shouldn't be doing it. But actually he was quoting an article which, in fact, said the opposite, that the voter ID laws we had in place didn't actually lock anybody out of democracy. So don't be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, when you see the government say that they're doing something, especially this government, say that they're doing something for one reason. If they're trying to make it out, if you're a native British person, and let's incorporate all the distinct ethnicities that are native to the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the British Isles, right? Let's incorporate all of the native identities, native ethnicities within that. They're going to do something which they say is in your favour. They're very, very likely lying. 99.9% they're likely lying. And they're doing something then which is in favour of anybody else that's not that thing. And then for the most part then is going to result in furthering the problems that people are already angry by. It's probably when they're telling the truth. It's probably when they're telling the truth. The biggest con, or one of the biggest cons in this instance, is around the asylum seeker fallacy, as I'm taking to calling it, or the fallacious notion that a lot of people coming here are simply asylum seekers and refugees fleeing persecution. A lot of people, a lot of outlets have been reporting on at the moment that a lot of these quote-unquote asylum seekers and refugees have been going home to the places where they came from and holidaying there, like in Afghanistan and all of these other things, where our enemies are really laughing at us at this point. Our enemies are really laughing at us at this point, ladies and gentlemen. But you do also have then the ones that are here inside the hotels, not only posing a danger to the people inside the hotels, but also the people outside the hotels, but they're just being horrifically ungrateful. So DJE Media, in this instance, accosted somebody on the street who worked within these asylum hotels as well. And like the previous auditor, by the way, who we covered on the podcast before, who DJE Media also interviewed, who I believe was arrested and told he couldn't go into these asylum hotels anymore, by the way, has now come out and said that these people are extremely disrespectful, violent, they're very wasteful, very ungrateful to the service that we provide them. They say this food is shit, they throw it at the staff, they throw all of these things, and the government is all about covering it up. So, this is not from me. This is not from the, pardon me, fascist, racist, supposedly fascist, supposedly racist, supposedly antichrist George, right? This is from the mouth of one of these other managers from inside the hotels themselves.
I was a chef.
Oh, right. Nice.
So we
she was a chef, sorry.
some curry, I think it was, from scratch. And one of the lads came in and started throwing the rice at us, and the other girl that was working there, he was kicking over the cutlery pots, he was swearing.
Just randomly?
Yeah, just saying that this food is shit, I hate this food. I told security to get him out, and security, they did nothing. They were useless. They were just telling him get out and did nothing. So I had to turn around to the boss and said my safety's first.
Like the woman that got stabbed.
Dangerous place, yeah?
There was a woman that had been stabbed. It was in the newspapers, but nobody heard about it until
3 months later.
A while after.
They cover it up, don't they?
Yeah.
And he kept it very vague, that he followed her. He followed her to a train station and stabbed her in the back of the neck with a screwdriver and he changed the train station.
Followed who, a girl?
A girl.
Yeah.
Oh,
because
damn, man.
She brushed his shoulder in the corridor.
Fucking disgusting.
Damn.
Fucking disgusting, a lot of them. So, there, ladies and gentlemen, she was a chef. She wasn't a manager, she was a chef. And because they didn't like the food, right, they were throwing the food at them. And you even hear that one of them, because one of the girls accidentally brushed his shoulder in the corridor, walking through the corridor, right, followed her to a train station and I believe either stabbed her or threatened her at the back of the neck with a screwdriver. These kinds of people that we're dealing with here, ladies and gentlemen, when people say that these are women and children coming across the border, for the most part that they're not. And the people who are trying to facilitate more and more and more of this and putting more and more of those genuine children that do come across danger. Not to mention, ladies and gentlemen, the more and more people see the system as being gamed, the more and more they actively turn against the system and the more that the actual asylum seekers will suffer. Right, because they likely won't get their claims heard because of how angry people are and they want nothing to do with the system anymore. They don't want to help people anymore. But tell me, ladies and gentlemen, a person that's being persecuted, a person that's suffering, a person that's coming here for refuge, would they be throwing the food at the chefs and saying, I don't want this food, it's fucking shit? You know, they'd be threatening people in this way. This is why, by the way, you should go and get the membership video. You should go and buy the video and listen to this, by the way, because Nadia had an extremely similar situation to this, where after she'd escaped from her second escape attempt from, I believe it was a third or fourth or possibly even more militant persecutor, right? One of her holders, one of her owners. Because they don't see people as people, right? When she was running through the streets of Mosul, rather, after escaping, she came to a house as it started to get dark, and realising that she would have to try and get in somewhere, because if she was out of dark and the militants, it would have been more likely that the militants would have found her. And if she'd been taken back then after trying to escape a second time, it would have been even worse than the punishment she had after the first time that was unsuccessful, which was, there's no words for it. I'll let you go and read the book or listen to the video if you want to know what happened. So she went into this house, knocked on the door, and luckily it was a family that didn't turn her in. Didn't turn her into ISIS for the fake reward money that they were offering, and actually helped her then escape. The guy actually helping her escape took great personal risk to himself and also his family, who, if the family hadn't been able to convince ISIS that he was acting alone after he'd found out, probably would have suffered a fate worse than death themselves. These people, there's no honour with these people. Make no mistake about it. They'll go after your family, they'll go after your kids. There's no honour with these people. So she goes to the house. Does she throw their food in their face? Does she call them all sorts of names? Does she follow one of the kids and threaten the kids with a screwdriver at the back of the neck? No. Because she was actually somebody in genuine need of help. These people are not in genuine need of help, otherwise they wouldn't treat us like this. But not to mention, how disrespectful would it be? Somebody coming to your home, ladies and gentlemen, and they threw your food in your face and told you they fucking hate this food, and they, you know, they threatened you in the way that these people are. How would you feel? You wouldn't feel good, right? Well, that's what these people are doing. That's what these people are doing. That's why people are so angry that they're here, why they shouldn't be here. Why they shouldn't be here. None of them. None of them, because they're all embedded. They're all military-age males, pretty much, 99%. There's one hotel we covered before, the Active Patriot, exposed that it was all military-age males. A lot of them coming from areas where there's heavily extremist terror group influences on behalf of Islam. And that's where you get the, again, very high likelihood that we've got terror proxies in this country. We've got sleeper cells all up and down this country that are just waiting to be activated. It's truly terrifying. It's truly terrifying, but above that as well, it's disrespectful. It's disrespectful to a host that's been gracious. And that you've come in and taken advantage of them in every conceivable way, taken advantage of their hospitality, not to mention you throw it back in their face because you're disgustingly ungrateful. And we shouldn't tolerate that. That should get a lot more people angry than what it actually does. That should get a lot more people angry than what it actually does. Speaking of getting angry, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of getting angry, because if you speak about this, you're liable in the UK to get arrested, right? You're liable in the UK to get arrested if you talk about this. Before we move on to the stuff about Agent Epstein, right? That's coming up in the show as well, just after this. Recently, ladies and gentlemen, a person was arrested, a prominent person on X was arrested, right, for tweeting out a meme a couple of months ago that somebody found quote-unquote offensive or didn't like. Now, I'll bring the meme up on screen for you now. It's a show that the quote-unquote British police doesn't operate in British interests or anything like that. They do not, in any conceivable way. They do not, in any conceivable way, operate in a British interest. They operate on behalf of foreign interests, and they cow to mob rule with the Antifa types and all the rest of it. So this person, you might know him, it's Pete North. Pete North goes by Northern Variant or FUD Daily on X. So working with Homeland, I'm not sure if he still works with Homeland, but he was working with Homeland on policy for a little while. And also there's a fair bit of political commentary on X and stuff like that. And he posted, ladies and gentlemen, this meme to his X page. Now, it's the classic anti-Palestine meme, if you will. And it says, fuck Palestine, fuck Hamas, fuck Islam. Want to protest, fuck off to a Muslim country and protest. Now, free speech, any kind of free speech in the UK would dictate that he has a right to post this, and he has a right to not be arrested for it. He has a right to post this without government intervention. That was not the case last night, however, when at 10 p.m. last night, the police rocked up to his house, right, from a couple of hours away to drag him to a police station to question him. Bear in mind, Pete has autism and a variation of Tourette's, which is very, very hard to manage. See if I can bring up the post in question where he actually talks about it. Where is it? Because I got the video to go through, which I'll go over in a moment. Where's the actual post? I don't think I can't find it at a moment. Give me 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. He posted this in the comment section, which is more than enough to go through. So, this is what Pete posted, and I'll bring it up on screen and we'll read it together now. So, Pete posted this on X to give a little bit of context. So, aside from the outrage of arresting me for a meme, there's something else I need to talk about. And this is actually one point in favour of the officer, I believe. So, it says here, we'll skip a couple of lines down. He has a form of Tourette's, and Tourette's is not what most people think it is. It's on the autism spectrum. It manifests as tics, not necessarily swear words or even verbal tics, but sometimes I get stuck in a stammer loop in hyper-stressful situations. Most people aren't aware I have it because it's always worse when I'm at home, usually with my missus. The stimulation of the outside world seems to keep it at bay when I'm out and about. So, what happened immediately after the video, which we'll look at now, ladies and gentlemen, the police officer, when he's about to tweet the footage out or post the footage, snatched the phone out of his hand, which you can see here, grabbed his upper arm, and Pete, again, having this autism, having these conditions, not standing, being touched or anything like that, went into a full-blown Tourette seizure, got stuck in a loop, clearly saying something offensive. And the officer said that if you don't calm down, we will cuff you. It's not something he has control over, and they dragged him out by force. They put him in the back of a snatch van. Not something which they used to do. Not something which they used to do. But in put inside of this sealed cage in the back of the van, he thought he was verging on a heart attack, because then he started having a claustrophobic attack. And he literally shouted down the road, shouted when they got a couple of miles down the road, because he really did think he was in trouble. As you can imagine, he says, I can only tolerate social engagements if I can leave at any time and I know where the exits are. To their credit, this is the next paragraph down, a couple paragraphs down. They spared me from a detention cell, instead holding me in the outdoor exercise compound at my request, basically in a large prison cell with a concrete floor and no roof. It's easy to see how autistic people die in police custody if they put me in a cell. I'm not 100% sure I've been able to write this. So this just goes to show how malicious the police can be. When people talk about the, banality of, evil, if you will. I don't want to use the word evil because somebody pointed out in my comments, we're all evil in some way by nature. Right. So the banality of wickedness, if you will, right? The banality of wickedness and how nonchalant these officers were in detailing things that are just completely incongruent, complete lies, but not to mention it's just stamping out any form of freedom, right? For a meme that somebody found quote-unquote offensive. Now, who gets to dictate offence? Who gets to dictate offence, right? It's subjective. He was done for inciting racial hatred was the official reason given, as you'll see now, ladies and gentlemen. So here's the video of Pete in his home getting accosted by these officers here.
Yeah. In essence, you posted something on the internet that they didn't appreciate.
Really?
Go over to one. I'm not sure you have, but I'll explain a few steps. And in terms of that, basically, our hate crime team reviewed it and said there are offences there we need to explore.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the time is 21:31 per round arrest for what's referred to as Section 19.
Section 19?
I'll explain it in a second. You don't have to say anything, but how many defence you don't mention one question, something which we're trying to court. Anything we do say, maybe get evidence. Basically, the Section 19 refers to spreading what we say like racial hatred. So you've posted something online that we believe is spreading racial hatred.
Twitter, Facebook?
I can't explain too much. It's just to give you the context beforehand.
Don't be put here an interview.
Because I appreciate you've never been arrested before, have you?
Yeah, once or twice.
Once or twice.
Frequent flyer.
So, put a little bit of a pause in here a moment. As you can see there, it was quote-unquote inciting racial hatred. So a hate crimes unit, which ask yourself, what free country has a hate crimes unit? As deemed that that post, which I showed you before, was inciting racial hatred. That's what they said, right? Inciting racial hatred. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, as you'll know, if you know anything about Islam, if you know anything about Muslims, if you know anything about how even racism works, is that there's nothing that Pete said that was racist. There's nothing that Pete said that was inherently disparaging to anybody because of their race. Because Islam is not a race. Islam is a religion. Muslim means religion, means religious adherent to Islam. It doesn't mean race. Because Muslims will tell you anybody who is an adherent to the religion can convert to it and be called a Muslim. It doesn't matter what your skin colour is. Right? You will still be viewed as the same if you adopt the same customs and adopt the same faith. Right? The only reason being that people associate Islam and quote-unquote Muslim with race because Muslims predominantly do come from Arabia and Middle East and Near East, Far East and so on, because they've massively expanded into a big empire. Colonialism and imperialism is fine when they do it. Because a lot of Muslims, simply by virtue of where they come from and where the religion originated 1400 years ago, come from areas of the world where the population is predominantly not white in skin colour, then people inherently make the association of Islam with race. But it's an incorrect association. So if I wanted to, don't want to obviously, but if I wanted to, I could convert to Islam and I would be a Muslim. If you was to insult me on the basis of that, it would not be being racist. You could argue it would be religiously intolerant, or the made-up term Islamophobia, God forbid. You can argue all these terms, but you cannot argue racist. So this is what you're seeing now, ladies and gentlemen, that the law is not only massively overbearing because of how it governs this way based on something that is purely subjective and is the whims of an individual that in just an instant can take away somebody's civil liberty like that, right? For something which they committed no crime, right? As far as most of the population be concerned, because most of the population is against hate speech laws. It's completely wrong. It's untrue. It's a lie. It is a law based on a lie. Pete North was arrested based on a lie. That should never be allowed to happen. That should never, ever be allowed to happen. That is really how you know that you are living in this disgusting tyranny, ladies and gentlemen. Because this guy, not to mention, he didn't say anything wrong, but the reason he was arrested, this incitement to racial hatred, is not even true. It's not even true. And that should anger everybody, because that could be you. That could be you. If you dare say something that is true, and you know it's true, just men are men and women are women, it's going to be you next, because that's classed as hate. Right? If you don't say trans women are women, i.e. men are women and can be women, if you don't agree to that, then you're guilty of a hate crime. Because you're intolerant, you bigot. And intolerance is a crime. Now you can see there that the love is love and the tolerant left are not so tolerant when they get control of the social power and the controls of political power, are they? They're not as tolerant as they preach. Somebody wrote something about a wolf in sheep's clothing. I wonder if that has anything to do with this. As you know, at the Fabian Society, the very logo of it is a wolf in sheep's clothing. This should never be allowed to happen. They should never be allowed to happen in a supposed civilized country like Britain. A supposed civilized country like Britain. Which has been made massively uncivilized via mass immigration and totalitarian tyranny. Something we really need to do something about. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot afford to simply be silent and then stop thinking about this. This needs to be at the forefront of our mind all the time. Our very life depends on it. Our very survival and civilization depends on it. Our government is beyond comically evil. They make comic book supervillains blush. Right? We need to be... I say we need to be ready. I don't have any, big solutions as to what we can do. What you're supposed to do, you say the wrong thing, you get debanked. Basically, we the number one thing we have to fight at the moment is obviously digital ID, but again, how do we reform this? That's what I want to know. How do we reform this? That's why one of the biggest things I talked about in Nadia Murad's story, ladies and gentlemen, is the mirror, the concept of the mirror. And that in order to make the positive changes in us, we need to understand where we are right now. And to do that, we need to be able to look in the mirror, look at ourselves, see what's wrong and put things right. It's a little bit like, if you're charting a course at sea, you need to be able to know exactly where you are before you can decide where you need to go in order to get to the destination that you want. Sad thing is that a lot of people are not willing now to hold that mirror up to themselves. They're not willing to hold that mirror up to themselves. To actually truly reflect on the things that they believe, because I think they're honestly scared as to what they may find, where the conclusions might lead them, because they know exactly where it will lead them. They know exactly where that wisdom will lead them. They just don't want to go there. But what you're seeing is, unless people do that, this is the kind of stuff you get. You get foreign gang child rapists roaming the streets, and you get people getting locked up people with autism locked up for social media posts. It's not a country I want to live in. It's not a country I want to grow old in. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And the reason why I'm so hard on these things is because I know how much better our countries could be. I know how much better England could be for our English brothers. I know how much better Scotland could be for our Scottish brothers. I know how much better Ireland could be for our Irish brothers and sisters. And obviously all sisters here included in all of those as well, by the way. And obviously I know how much better Wales can be for my Welsh brothers and sisters. We can't tolerate this, ladies and gentlemen. Because government corruption, government evil knows no bounds, seemingly, evidenced by Agent Epstein. Agent Epstein, as I'm calling him. So James O'Keefe has done tremendous work recently. We talked about the scoops that he's been getting on Epstein's Island, going over the stuff that was in Epstein's Island. I think it's only a matter of time before the phone book gets leaked to him, before the black book gets leaked to him. Because what's happened recently, a world exclusive dropped a few days ago of a DOJ Jeffrey Epstein investigator, Glenn Prager. And he got caught on undercover camera, caught on by an undercover journalist, saying and showing that the rapes occurred on Jeffrey Epstein's flight whilst Bill Clinton was on the plane, and whilst some others were on the plane, that Epstein was CIA, he was a CIA asset, that he's protecting a lot of other people, i.e. Trump. He's not protecting himself because there's nothing there. This guy's interviewed all the victims. There's never been an instance where Trump was on the plane when the kids, with these kids and when the rapes occurred, but that cannot be said for Clinton and it cannot be said for others. The DOJ didn't want to go after him, i.e. Epstein, because he's an asset for the United States and Israel. It's not talked about yet, but it's soon to come out that Epstein was a CIA informant. As you can imagine, the DOJ, a lot of others, they are flipping out over this. Ladies and gentlemen, they are not happy. But the video speaks for itself. And it'll be coming on screen for you now. Video coming on screen now.
It's not talked about yet, but it's soon to come out that he was a CIA informant.
He was a CIA.
Oh, he wasn't a CIA. I think he's protecting a lot of other people. He's not protecting himself because there's nothing there, but he's protecting a lot of people. Because Trump's now saying it's a hoax, so it's the case like a hoax or something. I mean, come on, you know it's not a hoax. He's been on the plane now. Well, it's just he was never on the plane with the kid. I've seen the itineraries and I've interviewed all the victims. There's never been an instance where Trump was on a plane with these kids and a rape occurred. But that can't be said for Clinton and it can't be said for others. While the Clintons were on the plane, while Bill Clinton was on the plane, there were rapes that occurred.
Overheard
How
at
interesting.
Phoenix Airport on September 8th, 2025. A senior Justice Department investigator who personally worked on the Epstein case tells all. Glenn Prager, who has reviewed Epstein itineraries and has interviewed Epstein's victims, drops a bombshell. He says that the DOJ did not want to go after Epstein because he's a CIA asset, that the evidence from his investigation confirms that Bill Clinton was present for alleged rapes on the Lolita Express, and that President Trump was not present for the rapes that Glenn Prager investigated, but that he...
Why is he protecting them? Is it because he's trying not to collapse the whole political system? I don't know, there's a lot of people that want the political systems to burn because of this stuff, right? Which I fully understand. I don't understand why you're protecting people that have done some of the worst crimes in the history of humanity, right? It's disgusting pedophilic sex trafficking rings, right? That we now know is denied as conspiracy for decades. Right, and now we know, and we have somebody from the DOJ now on undercover camera, saying that, Clinton was on the plane when these kids were getting raped. Why would he be protecting them? Why would he be protecting them? Oh, see, now, maybe, I don't know, maybe Trump was playing this weird, really 400 IQ game, maybe, where he's waiting because he knows how dogged James is. Because he knows how good he is as well. That's the biggest thing, because he knows how good he is and because he can do this undercover journalism stuff that really nobody has been able to really emulate, right? That he was going to discover all this stuff, and now that he has pretty much an airtight alibi in the form of a DOJ operative saying that no, Trump has nothing really to do with it, then maybe now he'll come out and be a lot more, dogged with it. I don't know, but why was he saying it was a hoax? Why is he covering for these people? What else do they maybe have? Is he concerned for, obviously, like his safety, his wife's safety? I don't know. Obviously, I have no idea. I can't imagine what it's like. To be fair, you know, as hard as we've been on Trump and everything like that for how he's handled this, you can't imagine the stress of what's going on when, you know, you're dealing with the most powerful people in the world that don't want this stuff getting out. And we've seen people have been able to hit presidents before. Trump nearly found that out himself, right, in Butler last year. So, again, we've seen that nobody is safe from these people. You're gonna get it, right? If they want you to get it, it's only by the grace of God that Trump managed to survive that. But the interesting part, again, a lot of people were saying that he's a CIA asset. He has links to British intelligence potentially, but he also has links to Israeli intelligence. Very interested to see where this is going to go. But you shared a couple of things there, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of very interesting things. And he said he worked on the case. He used to interview all the victims. There was about 20 to 30 victims in Palm Beach that he was interviewing and dealing with, right? Epstein would pay them and they would go to trial and they would just flip, right? Apparently he's seen the agendas. Trump is not involved in the rapes and stuff. Trump's not involved. He's seen the itineraries. He's interviewed all the victims. There's never been an instance where Trump was on a plane with these kids and a rape occurred. I remember that i.e. the Epstein list, was being killed because I know Clintons were on there. So, ladies and gentlemen, very, very interesting stuff. But the biggest thing is, ladies and gentlemen, as you can imagine, the DOJ come out and tried to disavow it, tried to, I'll see if I can find the official response. Glenn Prager gave actually an official response. I can't find usually that the O'Keefe Media Group, guys who run the page, usually quote with any updates, but they haven't done so. I have seen it. I can't remember what the statement said in itself, though. But as you can imagine, Mr. Prager was not happy, and this is why in the first recording where I likened this, ladies and gentlemen, to the Silence documentary, which Tommy Robinson done. Now, say what you want about him. The Silence documentary truly is something that is quite interesting, isn't it? Because, again, it incorporated a lot of this stuff, undercover recordings, people not realizing that they were being recorded. And as you know, the phrase loose lips sink ships, ladies and gentlemen, is in the public discourse for a reason. And it was, common parlance, if you will, common saying for a while, because it's indeed very, very true. The loose lips in this instance are sinking the Epstein ship, right, that are keeping all these big names afloat from justice. And I get this because one of the big criticisms of this being like, oh, how can we know? But the biggest thing is when people are not being recorded, their responses will often be very, very different. And we saw that in the Silence documentary as well, where when the head teacher, when the teacher that worked with Jamal Hijazi, when the councilman and all these people that were paid, five-figure sums, £20,000, right? Their comments were a lot different off the record than on the record, right? And there was the undercover reporting that Tommy did that exposed that. That's why I believe that gives it a lot of credibility, right? When Piers Morgan, for example, comes out and says that it's all bullshit and all the claims within it are bullshit, you have to understand that he's calling the children alleged that these things happened liars as well. And that's a risky game to play. That's a risky game to play. Because, again, there was a lot of testimony against this, and we know that we have a woke and corrupt judiciary and have done so for a long time, where they will cover for certain people and they will pass verdicts that favour some people and not others. So we have very little reason to trust the judiciary. And then Piers, by saying that the claims within that documentary are all lies and fabrications, right, despite the fact that the contempt of court was not for the claims within the documentary, it was for releasing the documentary, right? That was what the contempt of court thing was for. It's the undercover reporting that really makes it, and what I think adds that little bit of credibility to it. Okay, when people are not realizing that they're being recorded, their responses will be extremely different. As you can imagine, though, Glenn Prager was not happy. Was very much so not happy. When James tried to call him later, After being confronted over his claims that Epstein was a CIA asset, he did not want to talk on the phone, as you can imagine. Here's the follow-up video to that.
Hey there, is this Glenn? Yes. You work for the Department of Justice, correct? No. You don't work for the Department of Justice. You had a patch on your backpack that said FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, in the airport. Yeah. And you talked about how you interviewed the Epstein people, all the Epstein victims. Do you recall that conversation?
I didn't. No. How can I help you?
I wanted to confirm that you, in fact, did work for the department. Hang on up the phone. Let's try calling him again. Glenn? I'm not talking to you. Well, I'm not talking to you. You already did speak to my friend.
See how the context, see how the attitude changes?
I'm a journalist. I need your help, sir.
I'm not talking to you or any journalist about anything.
Did you interview the Epstein victims?
I can't talk to you.
Sir.
So yeah, that tells it all, I think. In my opinion, I think that tells it all, you know, and it just shows you again how much the attitude changed when he likely thought that he was on the record or whatever, is when he was off the record, which is why this undercover reporting is so important, and why I think it gives that silence documentary, and why I think it gives James O'Keefe's reporting that additional layer of credibility. Because they're getting people saying things that they believe when they're in an element of security, when they believe that they're in a safe space, when they believe that they can open up about these things, right? They believe that they're not listening to, they believe that they're not being recorded, there's no tapes, they're not being bugged or anything like that, which odds are these people are being bugged everywhere else on a daily basis, right? There's always foreign governments, there's always other people maybe even within their own government that want to bug them to try and get blackmail on them, right? Because blackmail is so effective. Blackmail is so effective, especially the worst kind of blackmail, child sexual abuse blackmail. And we'll see where this goes. I'm looking forward to following this now. Obviously, I've been following this for a little while in past episodes. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. I'm really hoping we will get some kind of justice. I'm really hoping this is going to allow President Trump, now that in a way his name has been cleared again, to really come down hard on this now. To stop calling it a hoax, because it's just disrespectful to the victims. It's disrespectful to people that, when you campaigned on this, it's disrespectful to your voters that you lied to them if it actually is a hoax, right? So I'm hoping now that we will actually get some true answers. But he also hinted as well that there's conflict in the DOJ itself with Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, or they call her Sham Blondie, right? And Kash Patel. There's conflict between those going on behind the scenes, apparently. So again, I hope they just get on the same page and actually get justice for the victims. That's the biggest thing. Like, we don't need to know the details, the exact details of what happened, right? We don't need to see the footage, as Pam Bondi was insinuating. We don't need to see the images, right? We don't need to see any of this stuff. Faces and names. And convictions. That's what people want. That's all we need. That's all we need. Let the victims get their fucking closure, especially the ones that were denied it now because they're dead. Let the victims get their closure, right? Finally, ladies and gentlemen, final story to cap off today, the travesty that is the Senedd. We've got to talk about it because, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you think that the leftist mind virus, if you will, is just an American thing, it's just a European thing or whatever, that it hasn't come over to Wales, it's just a Westminster thing, it hasn't come over to the Welsh Senedd, it absolutely has. As Welsh Senedd members feel so emboldened that they feel as though they can refer to their fellow people as animals, ladies and gentlemen. So, Mabon ap Gwynfor AS, he's a member of the Plaid Cymru for the Welsh Parliament of Diffor Meirionnydd, right? He made a post that I responded to. Which was of the Senedd Waste page, which I often use as a source reference, right? One of the big policies that is getting a lot of division in Wales at the moment is the nation of sanctuary. From what I understand, most people do not want Wales to be made a nation of sanctuary. They do not want just an unchecked number of random people coming here, right? because they understand how much that it will mean for their demographics. They understand how much it'll mean for their culture. They understand how much it'll mean for other things like language and, social cohesion. They understand how much it'll mean for their democratic rights and how much it will actually take away from them, ladies and gentlemen. Good way to think about this, ladies and gentlemen, with regards to immigration, is that there are only a certain number of people in the Senedd, because there are only or in Parliament, there are only a certain number of constituencies. And there's a certain number of people within those constituencies, right? So if you divide it down, you can work out within one constituency how much each person, right, has in terms of a vote share, if you will. Now, again, I'm not going to throw out any numbers because I can't think of any hypotheticals off the top of my head. But basically, when you have, 100%, let's just say it's 100% English, i.e. Anglo-Saxon descent, true blood English people within a certain community. Let's just say that. Or Welsh or Scottish, whatever. You can place this hypothetical anyway. 100% French people in a certain French constituency. It's purely ethnically homogenous, right? Well, they know that they group, if you will, their ethnic group gets they might not agree on everything, but they get 100% of the vote share of that community. Well, what happens when a bunch of people come in, right, and come into their communities? The population's gone up. The vote share hasn't changed because they all get one representative which they elect. Now the vote shares has to be split among fewer. So now each person's vote is worth less. Each person's vote is worth less. I think people will intuitively understand this. So they know that if you were to get a mass influx of people in all of the constituencies of Wales, for example, that make up where these MSs come from, your ability to assert your voice and assert your right by voting is going to be drastically impacted. If all of a sudden, if you have a community of, 1,000 people, and you bring in 1,000 more, and this is being conservative, as we'll see in a moment, you bring in 1,000 more and you put them in that community, well, now the 1,000 people that were there before that might be able to trace their ethnic heritage back generations, thousands of years, now have the same vote share as a bunch of people that have just got here, and their vote share, which they had before, has just been halved. That's just pure mass, right? That's why a lot of people intuitively understanding this might not be able to explain it in that way, but understanding why being a nation of sanctuary is bad. They see California, they see all of these other quote-unquote sanctuary cities and sanctuary states that are absolute apocalyptic hellscapes, right? And they decide they don't want that for their community. So some of the parties that have come out against this, that the Senedd waste guys have catalogued, are Plaid Cymru, Labour and the Liberal Democrats. They come out for this policy, People who have come out against it are Reform, Conservatives, Abolish and Gwlad. And they said Plaid, Labour and the Liberal Democrats are the anti-Wales parties. Strong words. Words that I tend to agree with. Mabon, or Mabon, however you say it, clapped back at this post, saying, wanting Ukrainian refugees to stay in Ukraine and face unimaginable suffering from Putin and his thugs, snapshot. For Doge Wales, Reform, Conservatives and Gwlad. Notice they missed out Abolish there, though. Notice they missed out Abolish rather conveniently. So, the comments then saying, we see you're shouting Putin again, nobody's buying it. Desperate stuff from a party that's being exposed before our eyes. And I actually quoted this post as well, ladies and gentlemen, because I quoted it with what the nation of sanctuary is actually a cover for. And that is, in my opinion, a policy to nothing less than, as we've seen in England with the mass immigration policies, to ethnically cleanse Wales, if you take it to its logical conclusion. I said, in response to this, taking a bit of a pot shot at it, right? You're as bad as Putin if you object to Wales being flooded with millions of Afghans. Lol, okay, bro. That's what I said. And here's what Mr. Mabon, Mr. Gwynfor, clapped back with. You'll see my post at the top now, and this is the post that I shared on X as well. So as you'll see here now, ladies and gentlemen, is infinite wisdom likened me to a dog by saying Chihuahua sent to bark. This is an elected representative of Wales because, admittedly, I'd done it in quite a belligerent and mocking way, mocking the globalist baby for what it actually is, calling a Welsh resident a dog. Not to mention, ladies and gentlemen, it's meant to be particularly insulting and demeaning, which speaks to how they view people as their political opponents disagree with them, because, as you know, a Chihuahua tends to be associated with a dog that's particularly yappy, annoying, and small. Right? So it's just pure insult. There's no eloquence to it. There's no argument to it. There's no refutation of what I said. Right? Because he can't refute what I said. Notice he didn't call me a liar, ladies and gentlemen, because he can't call me a liar. Because the words that I used come straight from our politicians themselves, ladies and gentlemen, namely the liberal females. So, why was I referencing, quote-unquote, millions of Afghans? Because Slynos Medi suggested that, without outright saying, but you don't need to connect too many dots to see exactly what she meant, that millions of Afghans should be allowed to move to and live in Wales because of the situation they have to deal with out there. Again, under the guise of empathy, under the guise of empowering women, under the guise of saving women from the evil patriarchy, and so on. I'm not making the claim that women out in Afghanistan have a good quality of life whatsoever, but I don't see why that should be made the Welsh people's problem. She said on BBC Question Time that indeed we should make some routes to allow these women, these Afghans, to come to Wales for the reasons that the classic feminists say about it, you know, empowering women through education and all of these things. So this was her on BBC Question Time giving that exact, although I tried to dress it up and maybe hide it a little bit. She didn't outright say we should allow tens of millions of Afghans to live in Wales, but you need to look at the population of Afghanistan and understand how many women it would be to understand that that's exactly what the logical conclusion of this would be.
What could we do as a nation to make it better for women in Afghanistan?
We could go into that. We could show leadership. We could use, we've got the Human Rights Act. We've got these issues that we can use to try and go into these nations. Afghanistan
to change the Taliban's view.
Afghanistan is a one that we have actually got some individuals living in our communities. They've been able to come. Okay. We could make a decision that Afghanistan is a country that we can't get to the source, so we will have that safe route for them to come to our country because it's unsafe for them to be there, because we wouldn't want those women to live in the way that they've been forced to live now, not going to education, not giving those opportunities. We could work. There is a different answer for all.
So there you go. We should make safe and legal routes to allow all of those women to come here. All of those women and all of the dependents, obviously. This would total to tens of millions of people, ladies and gentlemen. And make no mistake, if they thought that they could make it work, they absolutely fucking would. Ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine the vote share that would give our politicians? It would eliminate the Welsh vote. It would eliminate the Welsh vote entirely, ladies and gentlemen, because, as you know, Wales is not a complete ethnically homogenous nation already. And it has a population of about 3 to 3.5 million. It's not like in England, for example, where you've got a population, according to the 2024 census, of nearly 70 million, whereby already that would then, assuming that they were all native English people, which they're obviously not, right, is going to be over half the population, or about half the population. You're talking potentially 3, 6, 9, whatever times more than the population that's already here? How could you class that as anything else other than than a weapon of mass ethnic replacement? That's exactly what it would be. But when you understand that A, your politicians don't think of you as anything more than votes, they don't see you as people, and B, those who they disagree with are basically less than animals or less than people. They're animals and they actively equate them to them, as you saw with the case with me and Gwynfor. You understand that they would absolutely do that. If they could push a button and make that happen, of course they absolutely fucking would, if they thought that they would get something out of it. They would sell you down the river for a box of Maltesers. Not to mention millions of vote share that they wouldn't even have to earn. Just open the doors and let these people take over and hope that they'll vote for you. But obviously they would vote in their own sectarian interests anyway. It's the thing of how short-sighted our politicians are. They don't even see how this would backfire on them. The system that's eating us will eat them eventually. But make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, this is not an isolated case. This is not an isolated case, and it's all coming from the fucking liberal females, seemingly. Right? Sinead Williams, also of Plaid Cymru, has said that Wales, poor old Wales, little Wales, that only has, again, a population of about 3 to 3.5 million, as is, right, should take in all of the quote-unquote internally displaced refugees from Gaza, totalling about 1.5 million. That's what these politicians are focused on. They're not focused on delivering for the Welsh people, and they outright say it. They're focused on delivering for foreigners because they want to replace the Welsh voting bloc. They want to replace the Welsh people with people that will vote for them and vote in their interests. You have to wonder, who are they accountable to? Who are they really accountable to, ladies and gentlemen? Here's that video for you.
Is Wales ready and willing to welcome all refugees from Gaza, and not only those with British passports? There are 1.5 million internally displaced people in Gaza, which is more than half of the population, and half of all housing in the besieged Gaza Strip has already been destroyed or damaged. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, along with City of Sanctuary, has called on the UK government to welcome Palestinian refugees to the UK and for the international community to commit to a worldwide refugee programme for the people of Gaza. Once the UK has done this, the First Minister of Scotland has said that their country was willing to offer safety and sanctuary to those being forced to flee death, disease and destruction. Within the Nation of Sanctuary and Asylum Seeker Plan, one of the actions points are continue to promote Welsh values of welcoming those fleeing violence and persecution of war. So given this, what discussions have you had with the UK government regarding the creation of a refugee resettlement scheme for those in Gaza who want to and are able to leave? Do you echo the calls of Humza Yousaf? Is Wales ready and willing to welcome all refugees from Gaza, and not only those with British passports, especially given the Tory Westminster government's determination to break international law to enact its cruel immigration policies?
So you're seeing the problem there, ladies and gentlemen, is the international law part. It's outright saying there that Wales apparently has obligations greater than itself based on laws that it has no say in, and then it has to be flooded with people that would, if they were to be put in all of our communities, would drastically reduce the electoral power that we have via the vote that we have, which is already flimsy at best. Is already flimsy at best. You already see how disaffected people are with the democratic system because they've seen how it's been gamed, they've seen how they've been conned with it. I'm not saying that as a person that really wants any other system, when obviously when done well by morally virtuous people, which again, it's really moral and virtuous nowadays. They killed the last guy who was potentially the most moral and virtuous that we've seen in recent memory. You know, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others, Winston Churchill famously said. But this is what your politicians are focused on. When this is what your politicians are focused on, what the hell are you supposed to feel? What the hell are you supposed to do? When everything in the Senedd seemingly is about everything that is nothing to do with Wales, nothing to do with its people, because they don't want to help its people. They don't want to help its people. You can't blame people for getting very disaffected with the democratic system. I made no mistake, what you're seeing in England, especially at the moment, in areas of Scotland as well, and people are feeling it in this country as well, is something akin to the dying stages of the Weimar Republic. And that's a scary time. That's a scary time, ladies and gentlemen. It does seem that in the near future it's only going to go one of two extreme ways, for better or for worse. Because people are getting sick and tired of it. I'll give you a couple more examples before we finish off this show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, I got a very itchy nose and it's very annoying. Senedd member slams Conservatives' halal concerns. So do you want to know what was recently broke in Swansea? What recently broke in Swansea is that all school meals in Swansea are made halal only. Now, as you can imagine, that's a gross infringement on people's religious freedoms. That is an act of colonisation, because there are many religious people that would object to this, because religions often call for adherence to a certain set of customs, right? Customs and principles and rules that you abide by. In Christianity, for example, if you abide by the customs of other religions, that could be seen as nothing short of, heresy, apostasy, or, worshipping idols and stuff like that, right? Partaking and worshipping a different god by their customs, you could be in serious trouble for that. Yet the government pushed it through anyway. Why? Because Swansea is basically an Islamic city now. Swansea, as far as I can tell, certainly when I was last down there, it was very, very stark, to say the least. It's no surprise, really, because they're trying to pander to the voting bloc, which they really care about, and the voting bloc, which seems to have a lot more of the power. And that's why, again, if you think, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't the problem, if this is just England or this is just Scotland, it's not. It's not. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And a lot of these cities, they've got this problem now. They're still very ethnically homogenous. You got recent stats from Gwlad talking about immigration and stuff like that. They're claiming that, Cardiff, for example, is still about 85%, white Welsh or something like that. It's still about 85% ethnically homogenous. Well, we're already seeing mosques blaring the call to prayer at 5 a.m., right, which they shouldn't be doing, right, in a non-Muslim country, supposedly. You're already seeing things now where, like, in the plus 80% ethnic homogenous range, the people of Swansea are being forced to eat halal meat. When, again, if they'd seen the way that halal slaughter occurs, many of them would be massively opposed to it, but yet they're being forced to go along with it anyway. So what you're telling me is we have problems not only with government tyranny and adherence to foreign customs when the population of foreigners is at 15%, less than 20%. So when you're trying to diversify more and more and more, you're trying to push more down on us, you're basically saying the problems are going to get a lot worse with more and more that's going to come, because it's only going to get worse, right? It's not like with more and more foreigners, it's going to get more and more Welsh. So we've had more foreigners up to a certain point, and our cities have gone less Welsh. They're like some out of the customs of the Middle East and Arabia. All of a sudden, they're going to revert back to Welsh when the native Welsh population is what? 50, 60, 70%? Well, is that going to work? Is that how it's going to work? No, of course not. It's colonisation, ladies and gentlemen. And our politicians are so eager to go along with it. So Andrew Davis was the Welsh Conservative. I've forgotten this guy's name. I'm trying to think of what this guy's name is. I thought they had his name in this post. Let me see if I can find his name. It's something Roberts. I don't think it was something Roberts or something Williams. There we go. Waters, sorry. His surname is Waters. And here he is, echoing the points from the Muslim Council of Wales. Tell me why that's a thing, ladies and gentlemen. Again, still a relatively homogenous country in terms of ethnicity, but yet we have a Muslim Council of Wales, ladies and gentlemen. So already, with the little immigration that we've had, we're seeing these problems. That's truly an indictment on immigration, really, of any kind, that is not European or in some kind of ethnic and cultural relationship with ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. That is truly a massive indictment indeed. But here is... I've lost it a moment. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Bear with me. Video coming on screen now.
He suggested children were being forced to eat halal meat without evidence, even when the Muslim Council of Wales warned of the real consequences on our streets of what they called ham-fisted attempts at dog-whistle racism. He was still unrepentant.
Hold on. Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? So obviously it was only a short clip. This is the only clip I've been able to access at the moment. He was unrepentant, you say? Notice that very key choice of words there, ladies and gentlemen. Supposedly a secular liberal democracies scolding Andrew Davis of the Welsh Conservatives for being unrepentant? For noting that all of the school meat in Swansea is being made halal? And then this guy, who's supposedly Swansea's representative, comes out and echoes the talking points of the Muslim Council of Britain or Muslim Council of Wales. Which one was it? Was it the Muslim Council of Britain? Muslim Council of Wales, even. Controversial statement number one, or controversial statement number 101, whatever you want to say, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think there should be a Muslim Council of Wales. I think it's anti-Wales to have a Muslim Council of Wales. And it really does sadden me to hear about how our government has capitulated in this way and how many animals are needlessly suffering in this way because of this capitulation to Islam and the Muslim Council of Wales. And all of this is happening, ladies and gentlemen, again. You look at the problems with England, for example, and their demographic replacement and the troubles that they've had with that as a result of that. This is happening now whilst Wales is still an extremely ethnically homogenous country for the most part. That should really concern you. That should really concern you, and why I should be absolutely pushing for remigration and a return to another set of norms and customs to govern society, because this will devour us all if this is allowed to grow. This will devour us all, I can promise you that, and our government doesn't intend to stop it, because they're banking on these people continuing to vote for them, continuing to fund their initiatives, and continue to giving them initiatives to fund, to further indoctrinate people via charities and all of these things. Made no mistake, they don't plan on stopping, ladies and gentlemen. But who's obviously the main fault, ladies and gentlemen? Obviously, the fault, in the eyes of the Senedd, is the white man. Shouldn't surprise you. Dawn Bowden, again, another liberal female, going with the in thing nowadays, which is anti-white discrimination, said she was dismayed to see 7 white men form the cabinet of a local council. So, in, as I said, a very ethnically homogenous nation for the most part, she's upset to see the actual representation of the people in that nation in the council. Because obviously it never was about representation in terms of it being legitimately representative, ladies and gentlemen. It was about ham-fisting people into places where they shouldn't be. It's about ham-fisting people into places where they shouldn't be. Mark Drakeford then attacked the council for having quote-unquote diversity at a pretty low ebb. So this is where, again, for all the dog whistle racism, quote-unquote, that has nothing to do with racism, because, again, we're talking about a religion when we talk about halal slaughter and Islamic customs. We're not talking about race. But these people, ladies and gentlemen, as you'll see, are some of the most racist people that you can find. Except they try to hide it under the veil of anti-racism because the world has somehow been convinced that you can't be racist to white people nowadays. And it's been used, as we know now, as we've known time and time again, the whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing has been used for furthering colonisation. Here's Dawn Bowden for you, ladies and gentlemen.
I, along with many others, I'm sure, were dismayed to see the Vale of Glamorgan Council announce a new cabinet, which consisted of 7 white men following the local council elections.
It is disappointing to see that there will be one council in Wales where diversity is at a pretty low ebb. It is the only local authority in Wales where that will be the case.
Utterly weak, disgusting, cretin, treasonous man. This might not actually be a bad thing, though, ladies and gentlemen, this whole thing that, the council is made up solely of white men, because if you have a look at some of the other Senedd members, I wasn't going to bring this, but I am going to now, some of the other Senedd members that are distinctly not white, they tend to campaign against what a lot of Welsh people would be for, namely the closure and an end to migrant hotels in the city. This is Liberal Democrat Imran Latif voted against a motion calling for an end to migrant hotels in the city. Surprise, surprise, ladies and gentlemen. So just saying, don't mean to be that guy, maybe an all-Welsh council, an all-Welsh authority for the Welsh people in Wales is not such a bad thing. Video coming on screen now.
This motion distracts us with far-right rhetoric, division, fear, and racism. So the public ignores the real culprits, and it uses the term illegal migrants. And if desperation were a crime, let me be clear, seeking asylum is not illegal. It is right enshrined in international law, including the 1951 Refugee Convention. To call these people illegal is not just inhuman, it is factually wrong. This motion paints asylum seekers as a burden, yet they make up a tiny fraction of our population.
They also make up, you look at England, for example, how much is going on asylum hotels every single day. Say one, ladies and gentlemen, for supposedly a very small number, it's not free that we're keeping them here. It turns out they're actually a very expensive expense. So, and as you know, they're fast-tracking them for NHS appointments. They're fast-tracking them for private health care, dental care, all the rest of it, all at the bill of the Welsh taxpayer. And you wonder why people are leaving. You wonder why people are leaving for greener pastures elsewhere, ladies and gentlemen, because that's a big problem Wales has as well. It's a big problem Wales has as well, and I can't blame them. Where's the opportunity here? Where's the opportunity here? There really isn't any. There isn't any most of the time, ladies and gentlemen. And it's very, very sad. Here you go, this is the epitome of where we are in the modern day in the Western world, ladies and gentlemen. A foreigner in a position of political power in our country, actively campaigning on the interests of foreigners at the expense of the Welsh people. That's just the reality. Fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, we have to start looking out for ourselves. We have to start looking out for ourselves, and that's going to come with a change in political representation, should we say. But the thing is, people don't realise, I don't think, or potentially they do, and they're banking on being able to get their plans into place before this is ever able to happen. The more and more they do this, the more and more people see how they're being taken advantage of, how much their country's being taken advantage of, how much they are being rinsed for, and how much they are having stolen from them, the more angry, resentful people are going to get. As a result, the more to the right they're going to go. And the more you're going to hear more of this supposedly far-right racist rhetoric. And if history is anything to go by, there's a good chance it could then go to simply beyond rhetoric. And I don't necessarily want that. I'd like a peaceful resolution to these problems. But the biggest thing is, ladies and gentlemen, the people who have their hands on the levers of power right now are not going to give those up easily. But the thing is, political apathy is not going to solve this problem. And that's a thing that I've gotten into as well. Political apathy, not feeling that your vote is worth anything. We saw in America, especially with the work for Charlie Kirk, that sometimes you have to make things too big to rig. Sometimes you have to get people involved so much that it's impossible to rig it, and that it's impossible to fall for apathy. So for the people that don't vote, in a way, it is basically casting your vote for the opposite side. It means just that more likely that the people who didn't want to get in are going to get in on a minority vote, sorry. So we have a duty now, ladies and gentlemen, to not be politically apathetic. Especially because you never know. 2026 might be the last opportunity we get to right this. We've seen how quickly England has declined, right? Wales is a lot smaller. Wales is a lot smaller in terms of land and in terms of people. It can happen a lot quicker, ladies and gentlemen. We need to be ready going into this next election. Put it that way. So I would urge you, please, do not vote for anybody that doesn't campaign on the best interests of either the Welsh or the British people. I've yet to work out who best that is at the moment. And I will say that anybody that seeks to separate us from our sister nations at this moment in time when we all need each other more than ever, I don't think is necessarily going to be a good step. Think about it. We can all be nationalists, right? But individually as nationalists, in terms of individual nations, we were at conflict with each other. We never really did anything. When we were all united under a shared national pride and under a shared national symbol, we conquered a quarter of the world. So we're not better. I can't see the argument that we're better off apart in terms of being separated from our sister countries in the Union. I can't see us being better off without them. And we can have that same nationalist sentiment without having the petty rivalries that exist between us as sister nations. When we work together, when we had that national spirit, and we worked together, we had the greatest empire this world has ever known. And done some of the greatest good the world has ever known. Not saying it should be, but maybe it could be that way again. But that's why I think we're better off united than separated, personally. Which is why, especially Plaid, if you are a person that is that way inclined, mind you, maybe you'd like to look for something like Gwlad. More power to you. I would go investigate them, because Plaid are not nationalists in any sense of the word. Globalists and nationalist clothing, because why would a nationalist want to take you away from your sister nations and put you under the government, under the governance and power of a foreign nation, a foreign government, a foreign bureaucracy? No real nationalist would want to do that. Nationalist seeks to have no master in terms of their standing, in terms of their country, right? No master over their country that is not one of them. Plaid would seek to take us back into the EU and have us be governed by a foreign bureaucracy. So they're not nationalist in any meaningful sense of the word. True nationalists would never want that. Not to mention, the Institute for Fiscal Studies recently determined that Plaid, and this was even on the BBC, BBC grilled the Plaid leader, Yorworth, over this on Newsnight. Victoria Derbyshire challenged the Plaid leader on plans which would see Wales £1 billion worse off. And just have a look at him squirm. Just have a look at him, writhe in his seat as he really has no response to this. Now, this is only a full clip. Maybe you can go watch the full clip. If you have the full clip, ladies and gentlemen, send it to me and I can watch the full thing. It's just a clip that was shared online, obviously. But here is Victoria Derbyshire making clear that under Plaid's plans, Wales would be £1 billion worse off. And he really has no response.
You would like the funding formula for Wales to change, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies says would actually mean £1 billion less for the people of Wales.
No.
You're obviously going to say that's not right, but this is the IFS saying that.
No, I don't believe that. What we need to have...
believe it?
No,
They're literally the IFS.
No, what we need to have is absolute assurance within the way money is shared out by the Treasury that we're getting our fair share. And if you look at years of assessments, at what our needs are in Wales, we're talking about needs-based
absolutely.
policies
And the
here,
IFS
right?
have looked at the needs base and they've worked out you get £1 billion less.
Okay.
So again, there's not a full clip there. Obviously, I can imagine that goes on for a little while. But again, it doesn't look good. Now, being charitable, even though Run Up Yorworth has blocked me on X because he got caught in a flagrant lie and spread it saying, look, this guy is lying. He didn't like it. And he blocked me for it. Let's give the benefit of the doubt because, sometimes these institutes get things wrong. Sometimes, either wrong for calculation or they are politically motivated or whatever, but usually a lot of these institutions and, any kind of politicization in the modern day usually goes the opposite way, usually goes in favour of the left, so I can't imagine that. But it's not hard to see. right? Nation of sanctuary, just bringing a bunch of people in, is going to result in a lot of wage compression. It's going to drive wages down. It's going to drive costs up and everything, simply because more people equals more stress on public services. So it's not hard to see where they're going to be getting this from. So that's what I'm saying. If you are a person that is set on independence and stuff like that, I would look away from Plaid, because they're not the solution to Wales's problems if you see it that way. Because they're not nationalists, as they claim to be. They're separatists. You can't even call them isolationists, because they don't want to isolate us in terms of being on the world stage, because they want us to be part of the EU bureaucracy, the EU tyranny, right? That's what they want. So can't call them isolationists. They just want to stay out of everything, as again you could argue that a nationalist would in this context, aside from international trade and stuff like that. They're globalists. Just don't fall for it. Do honestly do good amount of concerted research. Maybe you're a person that thinks that independence would actually be a good thing at this point in time. I've seen some people make that case. It's quite interesting. I'd love to have a talk about that. The only reason I wouldn't be for it is because I believe that we're better united together with our sister nations than separate. But I believe you can still have the nationalist sentiment with regards to that. I don't know, maybe that makes me a fake nationalist or whatever. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. But thank you very much, guys. And it's been a bit of a longer episode today, so this will be out tomorrow now. Hopefully, if nothing goes wrong with the upload overnight. But thank you very much. I hope we enjoyed it. I hope we found it useful more than anything. Thank you for bearing with me, as I said. And please, can I reiterate this one more time? If you're able to even spare any little thing, ladies and gentlemen, please consider helping me out if you get value out of these videos. Please stay tuned as well, because some of the videos that are in early access at the moment for Tier 2 membership are going to be coming out in public in the next week and 2 weeks or so. So there's going to be some videos that are currently members only that are going to be coming out soon. So obviously you can just wait for those, but if you want early access to those, then that membership tier is a little bit cheaper. And you also get the ability then to submit questions for podcast guests and so on. But thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for all the support that you give, just in terms of likes, shares, etc. And hopefully getting value out of the show more than anything. I'm not really sure there's too much else that I can do now with the current environment that we're in. Unless you guys are going to be able to make that possible. And give this young man a fleeting little bit of hope for the future, and also that he may prove a couple of people wrong. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. You take care now. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, good night, wherever you are. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr. I'll see you next time. And you take care now. Godspeed.